The chandeliers glittered like a constellation trapped in crystal, casting golden light across the ballroom. I stood at the center of it all. My silver hair swept into an elegant updo, my emerald gown clinging to a figure that had weathered 6 decades of triumphs and heartaches. At 68, I, Eleanor Grayson, had built a life most could only dream of: a sprawling estate, a legacy of philanthropy, and a marriage to Richard that spanned 40 years. Tonight was meant to be a celebration of that life, a grand gala to mark our ruby anniversary. But the air was thick with something sharper than champagne bubbles: betrayal. The whispers started as I sipped my wine, the glass cold against my trembling fingers. Guests in their finery milled about, their laughter a hollow soundtrack to the storm brewing inside me. I'd overheard it in the powder room an hour ago, a careless conversation between 2 women, their voices dripping with gossip. "Did you see her? The young one with Richard? She's pregnant. Eleanor doesn't know." The words had pierced me, each syllable a blade twisting deeper. My husband, my Richard, had a mistress, and she was carrying his child. I scanned the room, my eyes landing on her almost instantly. She was impossible to miss, mid-30s, radiant in a sapphire dress that hugged her swollen belly. Her laughter rang out, bright and unapologetic, as she clung to Richard's arm. He stood beside her, his silver-flecked hair catching the light, his smile as charming as ever. But there was something new in his eyes, a flicker of guilt, perhaps, or pride. I couldn't tell. My heart pounded, a drumbeat of rage and sorrow. How long had this been going on? How had I been so blind? I forced a smile, nodding at a passing guest, but my mind was elsewhere. 40 years. We'd built a life together: charity galas, winters in Paris, quiet evenings by the fire. I'd forgiven his flaws, his late nights at the office, his occasional distance. But this was a fracture too deep to mend. And yet, the night was young, and I was Eleanor Grayson. I would not crumble. Not here. Not now. As I moved through the crowd, my sister Vivian appeared, her crimson dress a garish contrast to the elegance around her. At 65, she still carried the same smug air she'd had since we were children, always eager to outshine me. She hadn't been invited. I'd made that clear weeks ago, after our last argument over her endless meddling in my life. Yet here she was, sauntering in as if she owned the room, a glass of champagne in hand and a smirk on her lips. "Eleanor, darling," she purred, her voice laced with mockery. "What a splendid party. Pity you didn't think to include me on the guest list." I clenched my jaw, my composure a fragile mask. "Vivian, this is a private event. You know that." "Oh, come now," she said, waving a hand. "Family should stick together, especially on such a momentous occasion." Her eyes darted toward Richard and his mistress, her smile sharpening. She knew. Of course she did. Vivian always had a nose for scandal, and she relished it. I wanted to scream, to throw her out, to confront Richard and his lover in front of everyone. But I didn't. Instead, I straightened, my voice steady. "Enjoy yourself, Vivian. But don't expect to stay long." She laughed, a sound that grated against my nerves, and disappeared into the crowd. I stood alone for a moment, the weight of the evening pressing down on me. The gala was meant to be a testament to my strength, my grace. Instead, it was unraveling into a stage for my humiliation. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. I made my way to the grand staircase, my heels clicking against the marble. The band paused, and the room turned to face me. I raised my glass, the light catching its edges, and took a breath. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice carrying over the hush. Thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate 40 years of love, commitment, and surprises. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Richard's head snapped up, his eyes meeting mine. The mistress stiffened, her hand resting protectively on her belly. Vivian, standing near the back, raised an eyebrow, her smirk faltering. Tonight, I continued, I want to share a story of loyalty, of trust, and of revelations. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. But first, let's raise a toast to truth. The room erupted in polite applause, but I could feel the tension, the curiosity. They sensed something was coming. And they were right. I wasn't just Eleanor Grayson, the dutiful wife, the gracious hostess. I was a woman scorned, and I was ready to rewrite the narrative. As the applause faded, I descended the stairs, my mind racing. I wouldn't confront Richard now. Not like this. It would be too easy, too fleeting. No. My revenge would be meticulous, deliberate. It would be a performance they'd never forget. And Vivian, she'd learn what it meant to cross me. The night stretched on, each moment a tightrope walk between poise and fury. I mingled, smiled, played the part of the perfect hostess. But beneath it all, a plan was forming. I'd spent decades building this life, this legacy. I wouldn't let it crumble because of their betrayal. I'd turn their secrets into my strength, their shame into my triumph. By the time the clock struck midnight, I knew what I had to do. Richard's mistress thought she'd won. Vivian thought she could humiliate me. They were wrong. This was my stage, my story, and I was just getting started. The ballroom hummed with the clink of glasses and the murmur of conversation. But to me, it was a battlefield. Every smile I offered was a calculated move. Every word a step toward my goal. I'd spent the first hour of the gala absorbing the shock of Richard's betrayal and Vivian's audacity. But now, my resolve was ironclad. I wasn't just going to survive this night, I was going to reclaim it. I found myself near the bar, where the mistress, her name, I'd learned, was Cassandra, stood with a group of younger guests. She was radiant, her laughter a melody that drew eyes and envy. Her pregnancy was a badge of honor, it seemed, worn proudly as she leaned into Richard's orbit. He wasn't with her now, but his absence didn't dim her glow. I watched her, my heart a tangle of pain and calculation. She was young enough to be my daughter, yet here she was, carrying my husband's child. The thought made my stomach churn, but I pushed it down. Emotion wouldn't serve me now. Strategy would. I approached, my smile as warm as I could muster. Cassandra, isn't it? I said, my voice smooth as silk. Her eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly, nodding. Yes, Mrs. Grayson. It's a lovely party, she said, her tone polite but guarded. Up close, I could see the confidence in her posture, the way she tilted her chin as if daring me to acknowledge her place in Richard's life. Thank you, I replied, my gaze steady. I'm glad you're enjoying yourself. It's a special night. After all, I let the words linger, watching her expression flicker. Did she know I knew? Did she care? I couldn't tell, but it didn't matter. I wasn't here to confront her, not yet. Instead, I turned to the group around her. engaging them in light conversation about the charity we were supporting tonight. I was the gracious hostess, the pillar of the community, and I played the role flawlessly. But my mind was elsewhere, piecing together the fragments of my plan. Cassandra was a symptom, not the disease. Richard was the root, and Vivian was the poison seeping through it all. Speaking of Vivian, I caught sight of her across the room, whispering to a cluster of guests. Her eyes met mine, and she raised her glass in a mocking toast. My blood boiled. She'd always been this way, jealous, spiteful, forever trying to undermine me. When we were children, she'd stolen my toys, my friends, my moments of joy. As adults, she'd meddled in my marriage, criticized my choices, and now, she'd crash my gala to revel in my downfall. But she underestimated me. They all did. I excused myself from Cassandra's group and made my way to the terrace, needing a moment to breathe. The night air was cool, the stars above a stark contrast to the chaos within. I leaned against the balustrade, my fingers tracing the smooth stone. 40 years with Richard flashed through my mind, our first dance, our vows, the quiet moments when I thought we were unbreakable. Had it all been a lie? Or had something changed in him, in us, that I'd failed to see? A voice interrupted my thoughts. Eleanor, you look like you're plotting a war. It was Margaret, my oldest friend, her white hair glowing under the terrace lights. At 70, she was as sharp as ever, her eyes missing nothing. Maybe I am, I said, managing a wry smile. Margaret had been with me through every triumph and trial. If anyone could understand, it was her. She stepped closer, her voice low. I heard the whispers. About Richard. About her. She nodded toward the ballroom, where Cassandra's laughter still carried. And Vivian, showing up like a vulture. What are you going to do? I looked out at the gardens, the shadows stretching long and dark. I'm going to take back what's mine, I said softly. Not Richard has made his choice, but my dignity, my strength. They think they can humiliate me. Margaret, they're wrong. Margaret's eyes gleamed with approval. That's the Eleanor I know. But be careful. Revenge is a slippery slope. I'm not slipping, I said, my voice firm. I'm climbing. We returned to the ballroom, where the band had struck up a waltz. Couples swirled across the floor, but my eyes were on Richard. He was dancing with Cassandra now, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, her smile intimate. The sight was a punch to the gut, but I forced myself to watch. I needed to see it, to feel it, to feel what came next. I approached the band leader, whispering a request. Moments later, the music shifted to a slower, more poignant melody one Richard and I had danced to at our wedding. I stepped onto the floor alone, my gown trailing behind me. The crowd parted, their eyes on me. I extended a hand to Richard, my smile a challenge. Dance with me, I said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. His face paled, but he couldn't refuse, not in front of everyone. He left Cassandra's side and took my hand, his grip hesitant. As we moved together, I leaned in, my voice a whisper only he could hear. You thought I wouldn't find out, didn't you? His step faltered, but he recovered quickly. Eleanor, this isn't the place. Oh, it's exactly the place, I said, my smile never wavering. Enjoy this dance, Richard. It's the last one we'll share. I pulled away as the song ended, leaving him standing alone on the dance floor. The crowd murmured, sensing the tension. Cassandra watched, her expression unreadable. Vivian, nearby, looked almost gleeful. But I wasn't done. This was just the opening act. The night was a chessboard, and I was moving my pieces with precision. Richard's stunned expression as I left him on the dance floor was a small victory. But it wasn't enough. I needed to dismantle the narrative they'd built around meth-devoted wife, oblivious to her husband's infidelity, outshone by her sister's theatrics. I was more than that. And tonight, I'd prove it. I found a quiet corner near the dessert table, where I could observe without being noticed. Cassandra was back at Richard's side, her hand on his arm, her laughter a little too loud. She was playing her part well, the radiant mistress staking her claim. But I saw the cracks her quick glances around the room, the way she clung to Richard as if anchoring herself against a storm. She wasn't as confident as she seemed. Vivian, meanwhile, was working the crowd, her voice carrying as she regaled a group with some exaggerated tale. I knew her game. She'd always thrived on attention, on being the center of any room. Tonight, she saw my pain as her opportunity to shine. But I'd spent a lifetime dealing with her barbs. She wouldn't get the last word. I caught Margaret's eye across the room and nodded subtly. She'd agreed to help, her loyalty unwavering. Earlier, I'd asked her to gather information discreetly. Of course, Margaret had a knack for coaxing secrets from even the most tight-lipped guests. She approached now, her expression calm, but her eyes alight with purpose. "Eleanor," she whispered, pulling me aside. "I spoke to a few people. Cassandra's been with Richard for over a year. They met at one of his business conferences. She's been staying at his city apartment." The words hit like a slap, but I absorbed them. A year. A whole year of lies. Of late nights excused as work. I nodded, my jaw tight. "And Vivian?" Margaret's lips pursed. "She's been spreading rumors all night. Nothing explicit, but enough to make people talk. She's hinting you've lost your touch. That Richards moved on." I exhaled slowly, my mind sharpening. Vivian wasn't just crashing my party, she was orchestrating a public humiliation. But she'd miscalculated. I wasn't the fragile sister she remembered. I was a woman who'd built a fortune, raised a family, and weathered storms she couldn't imagine. And I was ready to fight. I thanked Margaret and moved toward the stage, where the band was taking a break. The microphone stood empty, a beacon calling me forward. This was the moment to turn the tide. I stepped up, my heart steady despite the eyes turning toward me. The room quieted, the weight of their attention both a burden and a weapon. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice clear and strong. "Tonight is about celebration, but it's also about truth. For 40 years, I've stood by my husband, built a life with him, and served this community. But life, as we know, is full of surprises." I paused, letting the silence build. Richard's face was ashen, Cassandra's hand frozen on his arm. Vivian, near the front, looked smug, as if she thought I was about to crumble. I smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of my lips. "Some of you may have heard whispers tonight," I continued. "Whispers about my husband, about choices he's made. I want to address them directly. Yes, Richard has made choices. And so have I." The crowd leaned in, their curiosity palpable. I could feel Richard's panic, Cassandra's unease, Vivian's anticipation. I held their gaze, my voice unwavering. "I've chosen to focus on what matters me, family. My work. My legacy. And tonight, I'm announcing a new chapter. I'm stepping down as co-chair of Grayson Enterprises. Effective immediately. I'm passing the torch to my daughter, Amelia, who's ready to lead with the same passion I've always had. A gasp rippled through the room. Amelia, standing near the back, looked stunned but proud. I hadn't told her yet, but I knew she was ready. This was my first move, not just a retreat, but a strategic shift. By stepping down, I was freeing myself from Richard's shadow, reclaiming my power on my terms. And one more thing, I said, my eyes locking on Vivian. This gala is about family, about unity. But not everyone here respects that. If you're not here to celebrate with us, you're free to leave. The room erupted in murmurs. Vivian's face flushed, her smirk gone. She opened her mouth to retort, but I raised a hand, silencing her. This is my night, I said, and I choose how it ends. I stepped down from the stage, the crowd parting as I walked toward Amelia. She hugged me, her eyes shining with tears and pride. Mom, are you sure? She whispered. More than ever, I replied, squeezing her hand. The gala continued, but the energy had shifted. I'd taken control, not with screams or accusations, but with grace and power. Richard and Cassandra were still there, but they were no longer the story. I was. As the night wore on, I felt lighter, unburdened. This wasn't the end of my plan, just the beginning. Vivian's humiliation was a start, but Richard and Cassandra would face their reckoning soon enough. I'd spent 40 years building a life. Now, I'd spend the rest reshaping it, piece by piece, until it was mine again. The gala buzzed on, but for me, the air felt charged, electric with possibility. My announcement had shifted the room's gravity, pulling the focus back to me, to my strength. Guests approached with congratulations for Amelia, their smiles tinged with curiosity about my cryptic words. I played the part gracious, composed, but inside, my mind was a whirlwind of strategy. Richard's betrayal and Vivian's intrusion were wounds, but they were also fuel. I'd turn their chaos into my triumph. I caught sight of Richard near the bar, his face drawn, his usual charm replaced by unease. Cassandra was nowhere in sight. Perhaps she'd slipped away to avoid the spotlight. Good. Let her hide. I wasn't ready to deal with her yet. My focus was on Richard, the man who'd vowed to love me forever, only to shatter that promise with a younger woman and a child I'd never expected. I approached him, my steps deliberate, my emerald gown catching the light. He saw me coming and straightened, his eyes wary. Eleanor, he said, his voice low. We need to talk. Yes, we do, I replied, my tone calm but sharp. But not here. Not now. You've had your stage tonight. Richard, let me have mine. His jaw tightened, but he nodded, stepping back. I could see the questions in his eyes. How much did I know? What was I planning? I gave him nothing, only a smile that promised answers would come, but on my terms. I turned away, my gaze landing on Vivian, who was now cornered by a group of older women. Her laughter forced. She'd lost her edge, her smugness dulled by my speech. But I wasn't done with her. Vivian had always thrived on drama, on tearing others down to lift herself up. Tonight, I'd give her a taste of her own medicine. I signaled to Margaret, who was mingling nearby. She nodded and slipped into the crowd, heading toward the event coordinator. I'd planned a slideshow for the gala tribute to our 40 years, filled with photos of Richard and me, our family, our achievements. But I'd asked Margaret to make a last-minute addition. Something special for Vivian. As the lights dimmed and the screen lowered, the room quieted. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, stepping back to the microphone. "Before we continue, I'd like to share a moment of gratitude for everyone who's been part of our journey, especially family." The slideshow began, soft music playing as images flashed across the screen. There we were, Richard and I, young and in love, dancing at our wedding. Then came photos of our children, our travels, our charity work. The crowd sighed, caught in the nostalgia. But then, the images shifted. A photo of Vivian appeared, not the polished woman in the crimson dress, but a grainy snapshot from years ago, when she'd crashed another of my events, drunk and disheveled, shouting insults. The next slide showed a newspaper clipping, a small scandal she'd caused in her youth, one she thought buried. The room gasped, whispers rising. Vivian's face went white, her glass trembling in her hand. I kept my expression serene, my voice warm. "Family is complicated," I said, "but it's the love and the lessons that shape us." The slideshow ended, and the lights came up. Vivian was frozen, her eyes darting to the exits. I didn't need to say more. The message was clear. I knew her secrets, and I wasn't afraid to use them. She'd come to humiliate me, but I turned the tables. As the crowd resumed their chatter, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Amelia, her expression a mix of awe and concern. "Mom, that was bold. Are you okay?" I squeezed her hand, my smile genuine. "I'm more than okay, darling. I'm free." The rest of the night passed in a blur of congratulations and careful avoidance. Richard kept his distance. Cassandra stayed out of sight, and Vivian left early, her tail between her legs. I'd won this round, but the war wasn't over. My plan was unfolding, each step a reclamation of my power. Richard thought he could rewrite our story with a younger woman. Vivian thought she could steal my spotlight. They were wrong. As the guests began to leave, I stood by the grand staircase, bidding them farewell. Each smile, each nod, was a reminder of who I was. Eleanor Grayson, a woman who'd built an empire, raised a family, and faced betrayal with fire in her veins. I wasn't done yet. The next phase of my revenge would be quieter, sharper, and far more devastating. I retired to my study after the last guest left, the house silent except for the distant clatter of the catering staff. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light of the desk lamp. On my desk was a folder, one I prepared weeks ago, before I knew about Cassandra. It contained documents, financial records, property deeds, and a draft of a new will. Richard thought our empire was his. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I opened the folder, my fingers tracing the pages. Tomorrow, I'd meet with my lawyer. Tomorrow, I'd begin dismantling the life Richard thought he controlled. And Cassandra, she'd face her own reckoning soon enough. As for Vivian, I'd already shown her I wasn't to be trifled with. The rest would come in time. I leaned back in my chair, the whiskey warming my throat. The night had been a battle, but I'd emerged stronger. This was my story, my stage, and I was just beginning to write the ending. The morning after the gala, the house was quiet, the echoes of last night's drama lingering like a faint perfume. I sat in my study, the folder of documents still open on my desk. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the pages that held the blueprint of my revenge. Richard was still asleep upstairs, or perhaps avoiding me. Either way, it gave me space to plan. Cassandra's existence and Vivian's betrayal had shaken me, but they'd also awakened something fiercely, a determination to reclaim my life. Not just for show, but for myself. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness grounding me. Last night, I'd made a statement, publicly stepping away from Grayson Enterprises and exposing Vivian's flaws. But statements were fleeting. True power lay in action, in the quiet moves that reshaped the board. My lawyer, Clara, was due to arrive soon. She'd been with me for decades. Her sharp mind and fierce loyalty a perfect match for what I needed now. The doorbell chimed, and I rose, smoothing my silk blouse. Clara entered, her briefcase in hand, her gray hair pulled into a neat bun. At 62, she was a force calm, precise, and unflinching. "Eleanor," she said, her eyes scanning me. "You look different. Stronger." "I feel it," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Let's get to work." We spent the next hour reviewing the documents. Grayson Enterprises was a joint empire, but I'd been the one to nurture its growth, to turn it from a modest investment firm into a philanthropic powerhouse. Richard had the charm, the connections, but I had the vision. The financial records showed my contributions clearly. Every charity initiative, every expansion, bore my signature. And the will. It was time to rewrite it. "I want Amelia to inherit my shares," I said, my voice steady. "And I want to liquidate my personal holdings, sell them off. Transfer the funds to a new trust. Richard gets nothing beyond what's legally required." Clara nodded, making notes. "It's bold. Eleanor. He'll fight it. And this Mistress Cassandrash might complicate things, especially with a child." "Let her try," I said, leaning back. "I've built this life. I won't let them tear it down." As Clara left, I felt a weight lift. The legal moves were just the beginning. I needed to confront Richard, to lay bare the truth and see what he'd do with it. I found him in the garden, pruning rosacea, hobby he'd always claimed soothed him. Today, it looked like an escape. "Eleanor," he said, glancing up, his shears pausing. "About last night." "No." I cut him off, my voice cold. "You don't get to explain. I know about Cassandra. I know about the baby." His face crumpled, the shears falling to the grass. "Eleanor, I didn't mean for you to find out like this. I was going to tell you." "When?" I snapped, stepping closer. "After she'd moved into our home. After you'd paraded her in front of our friends. 40 years. Richard, I gave you everything." He looked away, his shoulders slumping. "I love you, Eleanor. I always have. But Cassandra, she's different. She's young." I finished, my voice a blade. "Fertile. A fresh start. Is that it?" He didn't answer, but his silence was enough. I turned away, my heart aching but my resolve unbroken. "You'll hear from my lawyer," I said over my shoulder. "This isn't over." I spent the afternoon with Amelia, discussing her new role at Grayson Enterprises. She was hesitant, worried about the weight of it all, but I saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire I'd had at her age. "You're ready," I told her, squeezing her hand. "This is your legacy now." By evening, I was ready for the next step. Cassandra. I'd avoided her last night, but now I needed to understand her. I'd learned from Margaret that she was staying at a hotel in town, likely to avoid scrutiny. I sent her a message through a mutual acquaintance, requesting a meeting. To my surprise, she agreed. We met at a quiet cafe, the kind of place where secrets could be whispered without fear of eavesdropping. Cassandra arrived, her pregnancy more pronounced in the soft light, her face a mix of defiance and nervousness. She was beautiful, I had to admit, but there was a fragility beneath her confidence. "Mrs. Grayson," she said, sitting across from me. I didn't expect this. Nor did I replied, my tone even. But here we are. Tell me, Cassandra, what do you want from this? From him. She hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of her cup. I love Richard, she said finally. He loves me. The baby, it wasn't planned, but it's real. I want a life with him. I studied her, searching for deceit, but found only sincerity. It hurt, more than I expected. She wasn't a villain, just a woman caught in a story she didn't fully understand. And what about me? I asked. Did you think about what this would do to me? Her eyes dropped. I thought you'd leave him, that you'd move on. I laughed, a bitter sound. Move on. After 40 years. You don't know me, Cassandra. But you will. I left the cafe, my mind clearer. She wasn't my enemy. Not really. Richard was the one who'd made the choices, who'd broken the vows. My revenge would focus on him, on dismantling the life he thought he could rebuild with her. That night, I began drafting a public statement, a letter to our community, our friends, our family. It would reveal Richard's betrayal, not with venom, but with dignity. I'd expose his choices while highlighting my own strength, my decision to step back and let Amelia shine. It was a move that would shift the narrative, ensuring I wasn't seen as a victim, but as a woman in control. As I wrote, I felt a spark of hope. This wasn't just revenge, it was rebirth. I was shedding the weight of a marriage that no longer served me, stepping into a future I'd shape alone. Vivian, Richard, Cassandra Theed all played their parts. Now, it was my turn. The days following the gala were a whirlwind of action, each step a brick in the foundation of my new life. The letter I drafted was published in the local paper and shared online. A measured but unflinching account of Richard's infidelity and my decision to step away from Grayson Enterprises. I didn't name Cassandra, but I didn't need Toth community knew. And the whispers had turned to support for me. Friends called, offering love and admiration. Strangers sent messages, praising my courage. I wasn't a victim in their eyes. I was a phoenix. Richard moved out the next day, his bags packed in silence. He tried to speak, to apologize, but I waved him away. You've said enough, I told him, my voice steady. Go to her. See if she's worth it. He left without another word, his shoulders hunched, the weight of his choices visible at last. Cassandra, I learned, had moved into his city apartment. I didn't care. My focus was on the future. Amelia was thriving at Grayson Enterprises, her fresh ideas breathing new life into the company. I mentored her from afar, my role now one of guidance rather than control. It felt right, like passing a torch I'd carried too long. Vivian, predictably, didn't go quietly. She called, her voice shrill with indignation, accusing me of humiliating her at the gala. You think you're so perfect, she spat. You'll regret this. Eleanor. I laughed, the sound surprising even me. Vivian, the only thing I regret is letting you hurt me for so long. Stay out of my life." I hung up, and for the first time in years, I felt free of her. She'd always been a shadow, but I'd stepped into the light. Her power over me was gone. Weeks later, I hosted a smaller gathering, not a gala, but a quiet dinner with close friends and Amelia. The house felt different now, lighter, as if it had exhaled decades of tension. We laughed, shared stories, and toasted to new beginnings. Margaret raised her glass, her eyes twinkling. "To Eleanor," she said, "the strongest woman I know." I smiled, my heart full. "To all of us," I replied, "to choosing our own stories." After dinner, I walked through the gardens. The roses Richard once tended now blooming under a gardener's care. I thought about the woman I'd been at the start of this hurt. Betrayed, but determined. I'd turn that pain into power, not by destroying others, but by rebuilding myself. Richard and Cassandra would have their life, their child. Vivian would have her bitterness. But I had something better, myself. My revenge wasn't loud or cruel. It was in the way I'd reclaimed my narrative, in the legacy I'd passed to Amelia, in the strength I'd shown the world. I'd announced it at the gala, not with screams, but with actions deliberate, unshakable, and mine. As I stood under the stars, the night air cool against my skin, I felt whole. The story wasn't over, but it was mine to write now, and I was ready for the next chapter.